Did you know the Bible never says how many people died in the flood? It only tells you how many survived, 8. The rest, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, vanish without a single number, without a single name. Today we're going to look at that gap, at the people who were left on the other side of the door, following the original Hebrew text. That silence about who died is the most disturbing part of the whole account. Behind every absent number was someone with a name of their own. Almost everyone knows this story, from the boat, the animals 2 by 2, the rainbow at the end, the children's book version. Today, we're going to do the opposite, turn our backs on the ark and look outward at the crowd nobody remembers. Today, we're going to do the opposite, turn our backs on the ark and look outward at the crowd nobody remembers. But before we talk about the water, we have to talk about the world it swallowed. And that world looked nothing like the cavemen we usually imagine. Genesis describes something far more uncomfortable, a developed civilization. Long before Noah, the text pauses on a single family. Genesis describes something far more uncomfortable, a developed civilization. Long before Noah, the text pauses on a single family. It speaks of a man who was the father of all who play instruments, music composed, tuned, rehearsed until it sounded right. In the same breath appears another man forging tools of bronze and iron, metalworking, smelting, sharp edges. And a few verses earlier, it mentions that a city had been built, not a mud village, a city. Music, metal, cities. The text is telling you quite deliberately that the people who were going to be left outside were not ignorant or primitive. They were builders, artists, heirs to generations of accumulated craft, people who likely viewed their own era with the same quiet pride we view ours. The most dangerous thing that generation had wasn't what it lacked, it was what it had in excess: talent, certainty, and a deep calm. It wasn't ignorance that sank those people, it was confidence. We imagine Noah building the ark almost in secret, appearing from nowhere already finished. The text says exactly the opposite. Noah was 500 years old when he began having children, and 600 when the waters came. Nearly a century between one and the other. There's also that famous number, the 120 years, read 2 different ways across the centuries. I won't sell you either reading as the only truth, but the backdrop doesn't change. This didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, in plain sight, for decades. Wood being cut, beams rising against the sky. A man and his family bent over a colossal structure while the whole world walked past and commented on the progress with a laugh. A project impossible to hide, planted right in the middle of everyone's daily routine. And Noah didn't work in silence. The Apostle Peter would later describe him with 2 words worth gold: a preacher of righteousness, a herald. Genesis doesn't give us the exact content of those warnings, so any speech we put in his mouth is our own invention. But the idea Peter leaves us with is powerful. For an entire human lifetime, a warning walked among those people, with a face, a voice, a name. Imagine being one of those neighbors, watching a man pour decades of his life into warning you about something you'd rather not hear. Imagine being one of those neighbors, watching a man pour decades of his life into warning you about something you'd rather not hear. If that image lands with you, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments. Would you have listened to Noah, or would you have looked the other way? Since we're looking closely at the text, let me show you the first of those Hebrew words because it's beautiful. The word we translate as ark is tevah. In the entire Hebrew Bible, it appears for only 2 objects. One is this vessel of Noah's. The other, centuries later, is Moses' basket. A desperate mother builds that basket and seals it with pitch to save her baby from the waters of the Nile. It has the same name, tevah. 2 vessels in all of Scripture. 2 times a life is saved from the water inside a wooden box sealed with pitch. Keep that detail in some corner of your mind, because we're going to come back to it at the end. Who exactly were the people who watched that tevah grow day after day and chose, morning after morning, not to climb in? The text gives us not a single name. Imagine a carpenter who passes Noah's project at dusk, as he has 1,000 times, and this time stops to examine the quality of the work. "That's well made," he murmurs, running his hand over the warm wood. The old man knows what he's doing. And right there is the quietest trap in the whole story. That man saw carpentry. He didn't see the warning aimed at him, his wife, his children. You can admire the builder's skill without hearing a single word of what he's shouting. In fact, it's the easiest thing in the world. Now imagine a young woman with small children, her day full of urgent things. The old man's project is no longer a question for her. It's part of the landscape. One day her child tugs at her sleeve and asks, pointing at the ship, "Mom, why does the old man keep hammering that wood?" She answers without looking up, "He's always done that, sweetheart, since long before you were born," and goes back to her chores. There's no malice in that scene. There's something sadder, a warning that, repeated too many times without consequence, became folklore. Imagine also a man who has a reassuring explanation for everything. The sky is clear, isn't it? The poor old man got it stuck in his head. And the whole table relaxes, because that's exactly what they wanted to hear. Every era has its calm voice explaining why nothing needs to change, and that voice almost always wins. The tragedy of those left outside isn't, above all, the story of a handful of monsters defying God with a raised fist. It's the story of ordinary, busy, reasonable people. The warning had to compete against lunch, against work, against the same clear sky as always, and ordinary life won. What's truly chilling about this story isn't the cruelty of those left outside. It's how recognizable they are. Genesis doesn't say the flood began the same day the family entered. God announces that in 7 days he will send rain on the earth. 7 days, a full week between the final warning and the first thunder. The ship sat there, ready, its only entrance still open. The ark had a single door, one opening, one ramp, and nothing stopping anyone who wanted to climb in. There were 7 full days with the door open, 7 days of clear sky, in which anyone, absolutely anyone, could have walked up that ramp. That week was a door held open longer than anyone deserved. It was the last shape patience took. At the end of those 7 days comes the smallest, most terrible gesture in the whole account, one that's almost always read too fast to notice. The text adds 4 words that change everything. And the Lord shut him in. It doesn't say Noah closed the door. It says God did. The same one who for a century had kept that entrance open is the same one who now, with his own hand, seals the ship from outside. A closed door is frightening, but it's infinitely more frightening when you understand it was closed by the very hand that had held it open for so long. After that gesture, for a moment, nothing happened. No lightning struck. The door stayed closed and the sky stayed clear. Imagine that instant of absolute calm, no one yet knowing that the whole world had just changed hands. And then it began, but not the way you'd imagine. Genesis describes something far bigger than rain. The fountains of the great deep burst open, the deep first. Beneath people's feet, the earth itself cracked open. It wasn't the sky that fell on them first. It was the ground that betrayed them. In Hebrew, that great deep has a name, tehom, the same word from the very first page of the Bible, before there was light, before there was order. Creation was, in essence, an act of setting boundaries on water. In the flood, those boundaries are erased. It's not just a flood. It's creation running in reverse. Imagine standing on solid ground and feeling the earth move from beneath. Cracks opening in the street, water surging up, not falling down. This channel isn't made to dwell on horror. I won't describe what happened to the bodies. The text itself doesn't either. What we can imagine is that they ran. When the ground breaks and water rises, the human body does one thing: it seeks higher ground. People running toward the hills, carrying whatever little they could grab, calling out to those they loved. It's possible many caught sight, far in the distance, of one thing floating, enormous, calm, not sinking: the ship. Too far away by then for it to matter, because that door had been shut for 7 days by a divine hand. The text then pronounces the line, "Every living thing that moved on the earth died." All of it. Only Noah was left. There's no paragraph dedicated to those left outside, no list of names. An entire civilization disappears in a single line. That's what I find most chilling about this whole story. An entire world became anonymous in a single morning. They had names, just like you have yours. Now we can return to the word I asked you to keep: tevah, Noah's ark, and centuries later, Moses' basket. In both, there's a hostile world of water. In both, a box sealed with pitch. In both, someone is saved by crossing the very water that kills. The water that was the end for some was the way through for those inside. The only difference was which side of that wood the closing found you on. There's a third detail: Noah's name. His father Lamech names him, hoping he would bring relief from the toil of their hands. The name evokes, in Hebrew, rest, comfort, relief. Lamech was dreaming of something small and domestic. The rest that came through that son was on a scale the father could never have imagined. It arrived as the end of one world and the beginning of another. Genesis is a strangely careful book with names. Just before the flood, there's a long genealogy. Every father, every son, exact ages. And then, when the flood comes, everyone else who also had names vanishes without a single one. Those left outside didn't just lose their lives, they also lost their place in the memory of the world that came after. I owe you honesty on 2 things. The first, about scale. Whether it covered the whole planet or an immense region has been debated for centuries. I won't pretend that debate is settled. What the text wants you to feel isn't a hydrology fact. It's the moral weight of an ignored warning. The second honesty is about the ship itself. There's a boat-shaped formation near Mount Ararat that's been studied for decades. Some researchers believe they see something man-made, and scientists equally credible argue it's natural geology. There's no conclusive proof. The power of this story never depended on finding the wood. What did the 8 inside have that the millions outside didn't? The text is surprisingly sober in its answer. It says Noah found favor, and that he was a righteous, blameless man. Grace and integrity in the same breath. The text underscores, almost insistently, that Noah did everything just as God commanded him. He did what he was told. What set Noah apart wasn't that he was a better builder. There were extraordinary craftsmen outside. It wasn't that he was smarter. The difference was in the response. Noah heard the same warning everyone heard, and unlike everyone, he moved. Salvation in this account wasn't a reward for human superiority. It was what happened to the one who took the warning seriously. The ship itself preached that in silence. Genesis describes its measurements, its door, its 3 decks, but something is never mentioned. No oar, no sail, no rudder. It wasn't a vessel built to navigate. It was a vessel built to be carried. Those inside couldn't save themselves by steering. They could only enter, let the door close, and be held up by a hand that wasn't their own. There's something rarely told: the cost of being right. Imagine what it was like for Noah to be inside. He had preached his entire life, year after year, to neighbors he knew by name. And now he was safe, but listening as the world he'd tried to warn disappeared. Being right doesn't always feel like a triumph. Sometimes it feels like the loneliest place in the world. If you thought the confinement lasted 40 days, let me correct the most common confusion in the whole account. The rain fell for 40 days, but the waters dominated the earth for 150. more than a year sealed inside the ship. Most of that time wasn't storm, it was after. It was water that wouldn't go down. The hard part of surviving wasn't the noise, it was the waiting. Noah releases a raven, which goes back and forth. Then he releases a dove, which found no place to set its foot, and returned. The word used for that resting place shares its root with the name Noah, the one that evokes rest. The dove searched the whole world for solid ground to land on and found none anywhere, because everything that had been outside no longer existed. 7 days later, Noah sends it out again, and this time it returns at dusk with a freshly plucked olive leaf, green, the first sign of life. This account didn't stay only in Genesis. It appears, with variations, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, carved on ancient clay tablets. A man receives warning of a flood, builds a ship, takes his family and the animals inside, and releases birds to find dry land. Almost the exact same gesture. This doesn't prove the Genesis account, but it shows us something that gives you chills. The memory of a world wiped out by water was etched somewhere deep in the human imagination. When the earth finally dried, the first thing Noah did was not celebrate. He built an altar before building a house. God then makes a promise. He will never again destroy the earth that way, and he places a sign of that covenant in the sky, the bow. The Hebrew word for that bow is the same word used for a weapon that shoots arrows. It's as if the Eternal hung his weapon in the clouds. Every time that bow appears after the rain, it's saying in silence, not again, not like that. Even in the harshest account in all of Scripture, the last word isn't the water. It's a weapon laid down and a promise. But the warning didn't fully disappear. It changed shape, stopped being made of water, but it's still there. I won't leave you with fear, because fear was never the point. Those left outside didn't need more terror. They had a century of warnings. What they lacked was taking it seriously just for one day, that the warning was meant for them while the ramp was still there. If you're listening to this, you can still hear the hammering. There's still work in progress at the edge of your own life. Take a moment to look at your own life. That conversation you keep putting off, that truth you hear from a distance and turn down. This story wasn't written so you could judge those left outside. It was written so you'd recognize, before the after runs out, which doors you still have open. An entire world, brilliant, with music, with metal, with cities, had exactly the same opportunity you have right now. All that separated them was a decision they kept postponing, and one final moment when a hand closed from outside what had been open for so long. You can still hear the hammering. That's the only part of this whole story that depends on you. Thank you for staying until the end. If the image of that door staying open for 7 days reached you, or if this story made you look at your own life differently, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which door you feel you still have open. See you in the next story.